Tell us about this lawsuit. Who did you sue in particular? We'll put them up on the screen.
Thanks, David and Alex, both great to be with you. We filed suit against the primary opioid manufacturers and distributors. So those include probably the name people are most familiar with associated with the opioid epidemic, Purdue Pharma, but other companies as well, all for their role, as you said at the outset, in really creating this opioid epidemic that has now become such a public health crisis that we're seeing across the country.
And what did they do or not do that you think gives rise to damages?
It's really what they did. What they actively did was to perpetrate a fraud on doctors and patients in terms of all the things they were saying and the information they were putting into the market about the addictive properties of opioids. Our complaint is around 100 pages long, so I won't expect your viewers to dive into everything, but it really walks you through the story of this epidemic and all of the steps that these companies actively took. This included creating supposedly independent groups, but actually those were fronts. They were funded by the drug companies, disseminating false information and saying that opioids weren't addictive, when of course we've known for decades, if not more than a century of medical thought, that opioids are incredibly addictive and should only be used in closely monitored situations. But instead we saw, as a result of these companies' actions, prescriptions spiking, and then all of the after effects, not only including healthcare costs, which are the subject of our suit, but also the effects on the labor market, which I know Professor Krueger has really gotten into with his fascinating research.
Well, exactly. I want to bring Alan in here in a moment, but I want to skip to damages for a moment. Let's skip over liability and skip to damages. That goes to the question of what effect this has had, not just on people, but the economy, the workforce overall. How are you measuring damages potentially?
Well, the damages in our suits are filed, there are 5 in 5 different states, and they're filed on behalf of classes of plaintiffs who purchased health insurance in those states. So if you bought a policy yourself, or if your employer purchased coverage for you, your employer is part of the class. But the damages are the increase in the cost of health insurance as a result of this crisis. There are many different estimates out there. One of the lower estimates I've seen is using some of the most recent data, though, that has really been aggregated, and that's from 2013 data showing about a $14 billion increase just in private insurance costs nationally as a result of the opioid epidemic. The insurance companies aren't eating those costs, they're passing them on to policyholders. So you and I and everyone who is purchasing all or a portion of a private insurance policy, we have all paid more for our insurance coverage as a result of these companies' misconduct.
So Alan, as I say, you've done extensive research into the effect of opioids, particularly on the job market here. This is a sort of an interesting way into it, the increased cost of medical benefits.
Well, it's an example, I think, of our legal system working the way it should, where those who are responsible for problems bear cost for it, and they should think twice before they take actions. I'm curious if there's evidence that the pharmaceutical companies are changing their strategy. Have they responded to the suits that have taken place, not only yours, but also some of the states suing under Medicaid?
Sure, and as you mentioned, there are many, many states and cities and counties that have filed suit, and those suits are consolidated in a federal court in Ohio. There's some sense that the opioid companies are responding. The New York Attorney General entered into a settlement with a few of those companies a couple of years ago that changed some of their marketing practices, and you see them earlier this year responding to some of the criticisms and saying they'll be changing how they promote those drugs in the field using their marketing representatives. But mostly what you see now are a lot of quotes and press releases saying that they too are concerned about this very quote-unquote complex situation, and they want to help address it. Well, the way to help address it is to pay for the harms that they've caused to the American people.
Yeah, I want to be very careful here, Travis, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Johnson & Johnson, which is one of the defendants listed, actually, I think got out of that business, right? Aren't you suing for what the opioids they manufactured in the past?
Absolutely. Some companies have changed their business focuses, and so the suits are looking, including at past damages and companies that were selling those drugs in the past. That's absolutely right.
Alan, does this work?
Well, we've seen this repeated. I mean, the same issue happened with the tobacco companies. So it should work.
Tobacco companies weren't affecting the unemployment rate necessarily. Or the market.
No, but if you look at the economic costs, it goes much deeper than what I've looked at, which is employment, labor force participation, and of course the human issue and the loss of life, which is a tragedy. The Council of Economic Advisors recently released a report on the total economic costs, which I think were around 5% of GDP. So this is a macroeconomic issue, and it's a human tragedy.
Travis, finally, just to draw the parallel with tobacco for a second, that took years and years. What is the time frame do you expect for your litigation?
We don't expect a quick resolution. We're buckled in for the long fight. And as we mentioned earlier, there are other suits by a lot of other actual state governments and counties and cities that are consolidated in federal court. The Department of Justice has weighed in and said that it will help with all of these suits as a friend of the court. And the court is pushing in the government entity cases for hopefully an early settlement. But the lawyers in those cases and the judge are also prepared for a longer litigation track if that's what's necessary.